Well, if you've been paying attention to the recent trends in the bicycle industry, you will have maybe heard about the 650B, the benefits of a 650B wheel and tire combination. The mountain biking world calls this the 27.5, and the randoneering touring world likes to use the French nomenclature, which is the 650B. They're both the same rim diameter. Obviously, you can choose different size tires, but lately we've been hearing more and more about it, and the claims are that the 650B is a smaller diameter wheel, so therefore it has a lower amount of rolling rotational inertia, so it is actually a faster rolling wheel and tire. That's the claim, and that's what I'd like to explore today. Both of these wheels and tires have the same rolling diameter. So let me go grab my whiteboard and let's get started. Okay, so over the course of the next few video series, we're going to be looking at the differences between the 650B and the 700C. These are choices that you can make when you're choosing your wheel and tire combination. You'll keep in mind that what we're going to actually look at is when the outside rolling diameter is the same for both wheels. So in this first video, we're going to look at moment of inertia. We're going to look at rotational mass, and we're also going to look at translational mass. We're going to see how these two different wheels might perform differently even though they have the same rolling diameter. So before we get started, there will be a lot of math derivation here. So if you're not interested in the math, I will put some links to different timestamps in this video. So if you're just interested in the answers, you'll be able to skip ahead and you won't have to watch me go through the math. But if you're interested in it and you want to check my math and make sure I don't make a mistake, then follow along as I present this information. And if you see something wrong, then you can post that in the comments and we can have a discussion there. But hopefully I don't have any mistakes in the math, but you never know it. You know, humans make mistakes. So, okay, so let's get started. Now the first thing I mentioned was that these are going to have the same rolling diameter, and I've already labeled that here as D. This is the outside diameter of both wheels. This is the 650B wheel, and this is the 700C wheel. As you can see, I drew the inner circle, which will represent the rim. I drew that as a smaller diameter, and I labeled it R sub B for 650B. And then on the 700C side, the rim is larger in diameter because the tire is shorter in height, and so I labeled that R sub C. On the 650B wheel, you will see I have a dashed line in the center of the outside radius. That dashed line will represent the centroidal mass of the tire itself. So we're going to I want to take that into consideration because even though the formula for moment of inertia assumes that the mass is at the outside radius, in reality the actual mass is distributed more across the cross section of the tire, and so it would be more appropriate to use the centroidal radius of the tire versus the outside diameter when calculating the moment of inertia of the tire itself. Okay, and I've written already here, I've written two equations for you. This is to help speed up the process, but the moment of inertia equation for a mass that is concentrated at the radial distance away from the axis of rotation is mass times the radius squared, and the moment of inertia for a slender rod that is rotating around a fixed point has the moment of inertia of 1/3 the mass times the length of that rod squared. Now these are going to be the spokes, and this is going to be the rim and the tire. Okay, on the 650B side, to keep the diameters the same, we have to use a 38mm tire, and on the 700C we need to use a 28mm tire. So let's get into, let me go ahead and calculate one for you as an example so you can see how I'm doing this, and then I'll just show you the others since I've already done this in advance. And we have a dog barking, so let me pause for a minute. Okay, so first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to define these radiuses. So for the 650B, the radius of the rim will be 584 millimeters, which is the 584 millimeters divided by 2, which is equal to 292 millimeters. The radius of the centroid of the tire, so we'll call it tire, is equal to the rim plus the height of the tire divided by 2. So that is simply 584 plus 38 divided by 2, which is equal to 311 millimeters. And then the length of the spoke is, and this is for a 650B, the length of the spokes are 270 millimeters. Now, I went on to wheelbuilder.com. I'm not affiliated with them at all, but I went on their website because you can build your own custom wheel, and it accounts for the flange diameter when it calculates the length of the spoke. And so this is using a DT Swiss front hub, and this is the length of the spoke you would need to build a 650B rim. I'll do the same thing for the 700, which will equal a longer spoke length, and that's how we will calculate the moment of inertia of the 700C. Okay, now that we have this, to calculate, we also need the weights. So the weight of the rim for the 650B is 400 grams. And I had this checked at the bike shop using a Park Tool scale, but I also looked it up on the website, and they were both consistent.
So it's 0.4 kilograms for the 650. Let's do it again, just for accuracy. 0.4, okay. Now let's go 700. 0.48.
Now it's later. Wow.
Let's do it again. Just some accuracy here. 0.5. So 0.48, 0.4, 0.5.
And then the weight of the tire. Now this is for a 650B tire. I am using Compass tires because Compass makes both 38 millimeter 650B size tires as well as 700C by 28, and they publish the weights of the tires using a standard casing, and so that was very convenient. But you could do this with any tire manufacturer. You could use any tire company manufacturer that makes both 650B and 700C with these different sizes, provided you know the weights of the tires. If you compared a Continental to a Compass, and you're looking at a 700C versus a 650 larger tire, well, unfortunately, the weight of the Compass tire might differ from the same weight as a 700C equivalent, so you wouldn't be necessarily being as accurate in your comparison, especially when we start to look at rolling resistance, tire compounds, and things like that that affect the actual friction forces as a tire is rolling over a surface. So I want to try to find something where I can be more consistent, and that's why I'm using Compass tires. But use any tire. You could use any tire company you would like. Okay, so anyway, the weight of the tire here is 354 grams. And when we plug all these into the moment of inertia equations, we will get, and I can do this for you, but let's just do one over here. So we'll do I rim, and that would equal the mass of the rim, which is 0. Well, we'll do grams, and then we'll convert to we'll do grams, and then we'll convert to kilograms later. So 400 grams times the radius, which is 0.292 millimeters squared, is equal to 34.1 meters squared times grams. Okay, and I did this with each of these, so the I of the wheel, or tire I should say, I tire is equal to the radius, well we'll go with weight, 300, sorry, getting sloppy here. So it's 354 grams times the radius, the centroidal radius, which is 0.311 meters squared, and that came out to 34.2 meters squared times grams. And then I of the spoke is equal to 1/3, and we're going to add up all the spokes at once because they're all the same length, and we're going to call it the total weight of the spokes was 194 grams, and that was on the Wheel Builder website using a DT Swiss spoke. I don't remember which one, but we're going to use the same kind of spoke for both wheels, so that way we're being consistent. And we ended up times 0.27 meters squared, and that equals 4.71 meters squared grams. Sorry for this getting sloppy, but I'll write this out better so it's all clear. So the total moment of inertia of this wheel is the summation of all these, and we ended up with I 650B equal to 73.0 meters squared times grams. That is the moment of inertia of a 650B with a, not including the actual front hub. The front hub weighs 107 grams, but it's concentrated at the center of mass of the wheel, so I'm going to neglect it for both wheels so that it doesn't matter in our analysis, and insofar as our comparison is concerned, it will not affect the results, or at least the relative differences here between the two. Okay, so we're going to remember this quantity here. I'm going to erase all this, take a note, make sure I didn't make any math mistakes, and then I'm going to write out all of them. So that is how that's how we calculate moment of inertia. So I'm trying to keep this video short as possible. So let me summarize here that I 650B by 38 is equal to 73.0 meters squared grams, and then I 700C by 28 is equal to 80.5 meters squared grams. Now, the weight of this rim over here was, the weight of the rim was 500 grams. The weight of this rim, recall, was 400 grams. So on a 650B wheel, the weight of the rim is lighter because it's a smaller diameter, so it has less mass. So that's why you have a 100-gram difference here. Also, the spokes for the 650B, recall the weight of the spoke here were equal to 194 grams. The weight of the spokes here weighs 206 grams. So the weight of the tire for a 700 was lighter than the 650B, and the weight of the tire for the 700C was 248 grams, and the weight of the tire over here was 354 grams. So you can see you have a lighter tire but a heavier rim and heavier spokes, and over here you have a lighter rim, lighter spokes, but a heavier tire. Now, at the end of the day, even though those things seem like a good idea, as you can tell right now, that 73 meters squared grams has less rotational inertia because of the total, including the tire, has less rotational inertia. And that means it's going to accelerate faster. And I will also argue, and this will be something we can talk about in a future video when we get to rolling resistance, but rolling resistance is a function of it's not a function of the rotational inertia of the wheel. It's more a function of the tire itself, so the type of tire it is, the compound of the tire, the material properties of the tire compound, plus the structure of the tire, the sidewall construction, how those fibers are interwoven, and the way they are oriented relative to the axis of rotation will affect, and the thickness as well, will affect the frictional forces. Those are properties of the tire. Now, also, rolling resistance is a function of the contact patch. So a longer contact patch will have more rotational resistance or friction versus a shorter contact patch. A shorter contact patch, and that is just purely through mechanics, that you can see that the shorter the contact patch is, the less force of less force of resistance there is on rotation. So we're going to get into that though when we talk about another video. But for now, in this video, we just wanted to compare these two, apple to apple comparison using the same outside diameter, and we can already see we have less rotational inertia. So if we were to plug in some numbers into the energy equation, which is basically for translational energy, we have 1/2 the mass times the velocity squared, and for rotational energy, we'll call this E sub r, or we could call it E sub alpha if you wanted to. Probably better to call it E sub alpha, since alpha is the rotational acceleration of a wheel. That would be 1/2 the mass times the angular velocity squared, so, or the angular acceleration. So we can see right now that, mass, I'm sorry, that's not mass, that's I. It's 1/2 the moment of inertia times the angular acceleration, or the angular velocity squared. So if I did some numbers here to see, I plugged in these values here using 18 miles per hour as sort of a benchmark to see how much energy it would take to spin this wheel up to 18 miles an hour, assuming that there was constant traction the whole way, there was no slipping of the wheel, as they say. And that's true for most bike riders. I mean, we generally don't spin out our wheels when we're accelerating, but unless you're really, really strong and you're on a gravel road and you're going uphill and you're spinning, that could happen. But on a flat road, more or less, or even on a slight incline, you're generally never going to spin the wheel. So I did do some of these numbers for you, and I came up with, on the 650B wheel, that we had for translational energy, and this is just for one wheel without a hub. Okay, so to do this properly, we would have to add the weight of the rider and both wheels and all those things. But just to compare the wheel to wheel, I have for translational kinetic energy, I had 31.1 kilograms, or we'll just use the final Newton meters. And Newton meters are good because those are the units we would use if we were calculating power later on. So that is for translational, and for rotational I came up with 20.7 Newton meters. And all it is just plugging in this for I, and then the mass was the total mass of the wheel and the tire. So if you wanted to, you could check my math, but it should be okay. And then you can trust me on this one, I hope. But if you don't trust me, do your own math. And then on the 700C, for translational, I had, and this is for 650B, and then for 700C, I came up with translational of 31.3, which wasn't that much more. And then I had 22.8 Newton meters. So here we had 22.8 plus 31 came out to 54.1 Newton meters. And this one came out to 51.8 Newton meters. So, already, the conclusion here is, when we get into the conclusion here is that there's less energy necessary to accelerate the 650B, even though it has a taller, heavier tire, taller sidewall relative to the rim. But there's less energy involved, and that would be counterintuitive if you ask most people. Most people think that the 650B is a heavier system, but it actually turns out to not be. That's one benefit of going with the 650B. In later editions, we're going to talk about resistance, rolling resistance, and I'm going to show you how the 650B will ultimately, well, I'm going to say this now, I haven't done the math yet, but my gut feeling is that the 650B will actually have less rolling resistance as well. So, I'm going to stop there. I did do a third example, actually. I did do a third example where I took a 700C by 38, which has a larger rolling diameter. And it turns out that if you look at that one, the I, yeah, let's go ahead and put this down. I of 700 by 38, which is be the same size sidewall as the 650B, has a total I of 100.9 meters squared grams, and the energy, the total energy, both rotational and translational, was 65.8. Man, my chalkboard skills are weak. I need to work on that. Sorry, E total was 65.8 Newton meters. 65.8 versus 54.1 and 51.8. So clearly, if you just put a 29-inch wheel on a bike and you put a 700C large tire, you're quickly going to add rotational inertia to your bike. That will translate into a slower acceleration. However, that might actually, there may be some benefits to doing this, because recall that if you take a 38 millimeter tire and put it on a 700C rim, the total diameter would be larger, the actual rolling diameter. And so for rolling resistance, that extra diameter changes the angle of the force vectors with the ground, and actually is there's a steeper angle, which means you'd have less rolling resistance. So in some cases, you might actually be better off with a 700 by 38, even though you're going to pay a penalty in acceleration. You might get back a lot of that in rolling resistance when compared to either of these tires. But we'll examine more of that in the next video, so stay tuned for that one. That's going to conclude this video. If there was something I forgot, please put a comment in, and I'll try to pick up on that on the next video. I hope you enjoyed this, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.